Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately called IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. And as part of our efforts to promote play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats. These are conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. There will be, by the end of March 2023, which is where we are right now, there'll be more than 150 Porch Play Chats available free to you on our website, on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram, and on our Facebook page. So here's how you find us. You go to IPAUSA.org. Up in the top right-hand corner is the link to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that. Be a friend on our Facebook page. The link is there for you. Follow us on Instagram, and magically, every Monday, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm the president of IPA USA. And with me on the porch is Stephanie Goloway.
Hi, Deb.
So great to see you. So Stephanie is an author of the latest book that you have to get, and it's called Happily Ever Resilient. And you can get it through Redleaf Press or on Amazon. And I'm going to put those links in this Porch Play Chat for you on the YouTube channel. Stephanie is a lifelong educator and advocate for play, storytelling, and the imagination. She's taught preschool, elementary school. She's kind of like me, special education in college, as well as I was never a children's librarian, and a professional storyteller. Her fascination with the thinking, learning process and the way it is supported by make-believe, story, and creative exploration is the thread that weaves together her diverse experiences. She's a professor emerita of education at the Community College of Allegheny County, congratulations, in Pittsburgh, and has presented on Fairytales and resilience at state and national conferences, including TASP and NAUIC. She's been a featured speaker on podcasts and virtual professional development platforms, and is joining us today to talk about why kids still love fairy tales and why we should fight for their right to hear them, read and play with them. Oh my goodness, this is such a fabulous topic because, you know, I don't know I don't know what happened. I grew up with fairy tales, and absolutely I dramatic played them. I pretended to be out in the forest. I use them as experiences to reenact and play. And I just don't hear many people use fairy tales in preschool classrooms anymore.
And that, I think, is I think that teachers don't use them much, but if you listen to children, they still are taking these themes, and a lot of them are from Disney, because I mean, Disney hasn't given up on fairy tales. Unfortunately, they're not the fairy tales that they don't offer some of the things that I think real fairy tales offer. But Disney has kept them kind of in the public consciousness. So you have kids playing themes from fairy tales that they've gotten from Disney or from screens. But I think the lack of fairy tales in lots and lots of classrooms has really, I think it gives kids, it's kind of like they're using the McDonald's of fairy tales rather than the whole wheat bread of fairy tales to nurture their play and to nourish their imaginations. And I think that that's a real, I mean, it kind of comes along with, as I've seen it, the kind of the decline in early educations and really all educations, willingness to let kids play, to imagine, and to take risks. I mean, to me, fairy tales are kind of like the risky play of children's literature.
They are.
You know,
They are.
the reasons that people don't want kids to or don't want to share fairy tales with kids are often the same reasons that they don't want them to engage in risky play and to use, you know, like real tools for woodworking and all of those kinds of things that all the research says kids need. And yet we're not providing that with them because we're so concerned about safety and what parents are saying and all that kind of stuff.
So let's talk about some of the barriers that teachers may feel are part of this. Oh, I can't tell that story of Hansel and Gretel because the kids might get scared, right?
Yeah.
Or I can't talk about Goldilocks and the Three Bears because I don't want them to think they can break into people's houses, right? So
Right.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, how about that? I think that one of the things that educators, adults often have a hard time, I don't know why, but have a hard time grasping is the fact that children aren't like us, that child development is real, that children's understanding of what they hear, what they experience, what they do is radically different from our adult perception. And so many adults look at fairy tales from that adult lens, wanting to protect children and all of that, but that's not how kids perceive things. Their cognitive development isn't the same as ours. And so I actually had a student, college student, an older woman, been in the field for years. When I asked students to pick fairy tales to investigate, she said, oh, I want to do Hansel and Gretel. And I said, great, go for it. And she went to the library and she got out all these different versions of Hansel and Gretel. And she came in, she goes, oh my God, I can't ever share this with children. This is terrifying. Like, their parents abandoned them and then they are abducted by a witch and she's going to eat them. And then they shove the witch into the fire. I could never share this with the children that I teach. And I said, you don't have to pick Hansel and Gretel. I mean, like, it's your choice, but think about why you gravitated to that story. It's because as a child, it was meaningful to you. As a child, you loved it. And isn't that something to consider when you're thinking about what stories to pick out for?
Oh,
for
that's
children?
a great story to help people sort of relax a little bit.
Yeah. She ended up not picking out. And she was like, I just
too risky.
That's fine. That's too much risk. I said, this is a safe space. Nobody needs to pick out any stories they're not comfortable with.
Right.
But I think
the reason behind
yes,
that's what drew her. Oh, I'm going to do Hansel and Gretel. And I also want to get your perspective because I loved how you said she went to the library and got all these different renditions of Hansel and Gretel. I think that is so important is that children are able to compare the similarities and differences between these stories and the value that has in seeing things from different perspectives for them.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, one of the things that I love most and have always loved about fairy tales is that many of the popular fairy tales, they're versions of from all over the world.
Yes.
And they're, if we talk about, oh, we want to be culturally sensitive and we want children's culture to be affirmed, which is a huge part of resilience. There's nothing like being able to see a story from your home culture, whether it's Hispanic or Iraqi or Chinese, and sitting in your classroom and having children recognize that, hey, this is Cinderella. Like it looks like our friend Shanique. And the imagery is from a country that we've never been to, but it's Cinderella. And even very young children can start to recognize that and see different perspectives. And I think, like some of the fairy tales that have been put out in picture books have been really dramatically sanitized and kind of gutted. And I think that's something that I always I worry about some, because what fairy tales are stories of resilience, which I think is the magic beans that we all need right now and have always needed. And that's why resilience is such a part of fairy tales. It's not about the happy ever after until you overcome the obstacles and the adversity. And I think children need roadmaps to see that they can, bad things happen. They just do. They happen to
Right.
all of us, but that fairy tales show them that they can get through intelligence and problem solving and self-regulation and all of those things we want children to develop that we need as humans. They get to that happy ever after, but it comes after challenges. And I think
Well, and
that's
I think that goes back to the very first thing you said, is that sometimes the reluctance to bring fairy tales into the classroom might be the same reluctance that we have for risky play, that we have so many, we feel like we're so fearful of allowing children to take what Bev Boz would call acceptable risk, or one of the terms that she used to describe risky play, that again, we are robbing children of that piece of development, that if they don't get it when they're young, they're going to take some risks later on that we'd rather they not take, right?
Mhm.
That have
Mhm.
long-term consequences, that and sometimes our fear is getting in the way of that, and we're creating those outcomes that we have no intention of ever creating. And
Right.
and so we sort of have to, we have to sort of, okay, I'm afraid to allow children to climb up the slide on Mondays and Wednesdays. And my comeback to that is try it and see what happens. Just try it. Stand right there by the slide. Just try it and see what happens. And then maybe if you do that on Mondays and Wednesdays, maybe you'll do it on Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. And then on Thursdays and Fridays, they can go down the slide. And on Mondays and with Tuesdays and Wednesdays, they can go up the slide. Different skills, different risk.
Mm-hmm.
And then what else could you do, right? So baby step your way through these fears that we have that may have long-term negative consequences. And the same thing goes for fairy tales.
100%. And I think that that's why I'm so passionate about it. I mean, I've been passionate about fairy tales. I did my master's thesis on them before we were ever even talking about risky play, I guess, because we were actually able to do it. But that idea that we have to trust kids to take those safe risks,
Mhm.
and to support them in that, and to give them that the agency and self-efficacy that they can do things. And I think there's so much research that's come out that not only is resilience and that ability to have belief that you can overcome adversity, the key protective factor against mental illness and substance use disorders and all of these and for children who have experienced trauma. But we all need it. And we look at things that are kind of going awry in society, and there's tons of research that says, you know what, it's because we haven't let kids take those baby step risks. And that's, fairy tales to me are, I mean, I always let kids go up the slide and got in trouble for it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um,
Have them call me. They can call me. Your director can call me. She can blame me for it. It's fine. You know how to find me.
But I think that those of us who are play advocates understand that with play that is child directed, children will come up with risks that they are safe within, as long as we're not letting 2-year-olds like do whatever, like hand them knives and then turn around. But we
Right.
can give them knives and show them how to cut a potato, and it's a lot more effective than giving them a plastic knife and watching them stab at something and call it cooking. I mean, I think that we understand that how important that children will go to the level where they feel safe, kind of to the edge of where they feel safe, and realize that they can accomplish something that they didn't know they could. And it's so important for social and emotional development, and their mental health. I mean,
Well, and I think that goes back to what Reggio Emilia and what Bev Boz always said, is trust children, trust them. But if they don't have those opportunities, I just remember, climbing trees and jumping off the swings after we'd gone as high as we could and hanging upside down on monkey bars and doing tug of war with mud in the middle if we didn't win that part, when we were older. And I keep thinking about how that internal sort of awareness of, oh, I've climbed too high and I need to start finding my way back down, or oh, that jump, it was an internal sort of, I don't know what you would call it, but it almost like, oh no, that's too high, right? And I need to get back down. But if we don't allow children to develop that, then there may be more serious things later on in life that they try to do physically because they don't have that internal sort of gauge of what they're capable of doing. And if we allow them to push it, just, Vygotsky says they need to be challenged in order to reach that next level, with support, but not overprotectedness, right? And I think we have to find a way to bring in these fairy tales in ways that we can feel comfortable and families can feel comfortable, and we can help families see the value.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I've always in my teaching, whether I was working with 3-year-olds or when I was working with adjudicated teens, I use fairy tales. I mean, and everybody in between. And I never had a child or an adolescent say, too scary, cover their eyes in any more than they'd cover their eyes if you're playing peekaboo kind of thing, or like, oh, and I think that's, I mean, obviously as a sensitive teacher, I was always paying attention to, I didn't want to terrify my kids.
No.
Vivian Paley in her work on fairy, like talked a lot about how she was always super sensitive to, like, I mean, and people would say, don't you think these fairy tales are kind of like, aren't they too scary? Aren't they too this? Aren't they too that? And so she was very, very hyper aware of not making any child ever feeling uncomfortable. And so she talked to the kids about it, and they would say, well, yeah, that was a little scary, and she'd back off, and then they'd ask her to go even further. There was a story that she told about I think Jack and the Beanstalk, and they were like, oh yeah, don't tell that's scary when the giant comes after him. And so she tweaked it and adapted it, and then they were like, yeah, but like, do you think that when the giant or Jack was up talking to the giant's wife, why didn't she have any little boys of her own? Do you think the giant ate her children? Do you think, I mean, they took it so far beyond what the story was, because I think children are trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong, how does this world of people work? And fairy tales are wonderful models, and they are not afraid. I mean, for a child, everything's what is unknown is what is scary for all of us.
Right.
And for kids, like, the world's kind of unknown. So it's not like they're not used to being afraid or one of what they don't know. They need skills to be able to overcome that fear and deal with it.
So I want to talk about how Happily Ever Resilient helps give teachers tools to navigate some of this stuff. Okay.
I think that one of the things that when I did my research on fairy tales and resilience, I used Ann Maston's model of at which Harvard has also their Center for the Developing Child as kind of the foundation for their work, and they've added the neuroscience piece to it, of the protective factors for resilience. And I looked at fairy tales and from all over the world, all cultures, 24 different cultures, blah, blah, blah. And they all have those protective factors of resilience. So they are, by definition, stories of overcoming adversity, which is what resilience is, and they match up with those protective factors. So one of the things in the books that I do is I discuss trauma. I discuss how it impacts children's brains, and how and what the model of resilience is. Because if we want children to be able to be healthy and successful we all need resilience. Children who have experienced or in any kind of toxic stress need resilience even more. That's how they're going to come out on the other side of it. So part of the book is like explains the sciencey piece of that in a way that I hope early educators can understand easily. And then I go into, okay, so why fairy tales, and how do they match up with the protective factors for resilience? And then it goes into and how to use the fairy tales in your classroom. A lot of the stuff that we are already doing, including play and child directed activities, and the stuff that most people, games and transition activities, all of that stuff can be tied into any stories. And so why not think about fairy tales? And part of what I offer is using fairy tales as a instead of looking at fairy tales through just an early literacy lens, which of course they are fabulous. That's why they're in all of our standards. They are the foundation of how story works for young children. I also I kind of look at everything through a resilience lens and offer some kinds of questions that teachers can ask as they're sharing stories with children, things to listen for as children are playing these stories that will help them kind of focus in on those protective experiences for resilience that children need. And then there's tons of activities, ideas that teachers could, that are hopefully open-ended enough that teachers won't look at it as a cookbook, which always... but I had to write something down.
And I think
to support them.
What you've done, yes, is you've given them tools to begin the exploration and discovery of including these fairy tales into the classroom. And I think that is the gift of that book, that it re-energizes people or provides an opportunity for them to see it differently, that it's not this horrible, scary thing. I mean, my God, Where the Wild Things Are, that was a pretty scary book, right?
Yeah.
But children love it.
Yes.
They love it. And then the Goloway monster book, where the monster has all these different, they love it. And so if you think about using fairy tales as not as a substitution, but in addition to those other books that they love, I think it's maybe we'll read Where the Wild Things Are all the time. Why not read Goldilocks and the Three Bears? But if you were, this is a really hard question because you are so so involved in the fairy tale culture too. What is your favorite fairy tale?
That is a really hard question.
That's like the top 3 favorite fairy tales.
And it varies from time to time. Cinderella, as a child, Cinderella was never my favorite fairy tale, for whatever reasons. I mean, it was like, I liked it. Right now, I am just fascinated with the fact that there are so many variants from so many different cultures all over the world. So right now I'm kind of in this like, wow, I never thought of, I mean, I love looking at all of the different variants, and that to me that's my fairy tale nerd aspect. But I think for a classroom teacher, because Cinderella is also a very common, I mean, everybody knows Cinderella, and throughout our society and culture, I mean, Cinderella like motifs are everywhere. So it's kind of an easy entry point. And then you can also start looking at what are the home cultures of the children in your classrooms. I've just been using a Cinderella version from New Mexico that's told in both English and Spanish. I mean, so there's lots of it's an easy entry into the world of trying, and it's not particularly scary. fairy tales. There's a more obscure one that's sometimes called Mother Holly, or Toads and Diamonds.
Okay.
That has, it's such, I think young children, as they're developing their understanding of right and wrong,
Mhm.
I mean, we know from research and from observing kids that it's black and white, like
Right.
there's good and there's bad. And this is a story of two sisters who basically follow the same actions and come out one good, one not good, and they come out with dramatically different results.
Mhm.
And I like the clarity in that. There are not really very many good picture books of that one, though, so that's a tough one. I haven't figured out how to get it into classrooms as much as I would like to see it, because I think it's such a clear differentiation. And there's I actually kind of like Rumpelstiltskin.
Oh, me too. I was hoping you would say that.
I like my favorite version is actually from the West Indies, and it's just like it's one of my all-time favorite picture books. I think I just discovered it, not all that long ago, so I've never used it with children, but I'm hoping to start working with some of the childcare centers up here and doing some story reading and storytelling. And I think what I like a lot about Rumpelstiltskin is that one of the protective factors for resilience is self-regulation.
Mhm.
And the scene where she guesses his name, I mean, there's so much self-regulation in there, like hiding and listening for his name and waiting and all of this kind of stuff all through it. But the scene where she guesses his name and he explodes
Mhm.
is like the perfect representation of not self-regulation.
Right, exactly.
And I think kids they need to see, like, oh, and I thought my tantrum was bad. And see
Look at him.
those negative, because it's not like he gets rewarded for it.
No.
And I mean, to me, there's just something, I think kids need to see characters that aren't all good. And I think that's one of the things I really like about a lot of these stories, is that they show that there are bad guys in the world, and you know what happens to them? They get in trouble. And the people who do kind things and are helpful and smart and all those things, they get the good stuff. They get the happy ever after. So those
Yeah.
are
Oh my goodness,
three
that
that
is
pop into my
wonderful.
mind.
I want to go back and make one more. When I was a teacher and a director, I walk into the classroom and to give the teacher a break or something, and all I had to do was hold up my two fingers, right? And children knew exactly what was going to happen, which was Little Bunny Foo-Foo, which is the most violent, scary thing ever. And I made it scarier, because it was Little Bunny Foo-Foo hopping through the forest. And then, down, so it was like, and then like this, and then, in one of the refrains, it's like, and they're all, and they loved it. All I had to do, 25 children in a classroom, all I had to do when I walked in was do this, and they were in front of me, and we were ready to go. And so, we do it in other ways. We tell these Little Bunny Foo-Foo stories, and we act it out, and we have lots of expression and raise our voice, and everybody screams, and it's just amazing. Why not fairy tales?
I got nothing for that. I think, well, no, I'm not going to say that. I think that fairy tales have gotten a lot of bad press. I mean, last fall, I was putting together a presentation, and I just went and Googled like headlines, anti-fairy tale headlines or something. And
Oh my.
like all over the world, like fairy tales are bad for children, they're ageist, they're sexist, they're this, they're that. And I think that tends to make parents and teachers wary. I mean, we don't want to do anything that causes controversy, goodness gracious.
Oh,
I think
boy.
that's a piece of it. But I think that it's also just Eckers. I did not know this. The book had been out. I was presenting, and somebody came up to me and at a workshop last summer and said, Eckers says you can't use fairy tales.
What?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I mean, my language
Oh.
almost got a lot worse than that. I was like, you're a professional, like you do not say this. And I was like, that just amazes me, because I certainly have worked with Eckers and my students have worked with Eckers in classrooms. Nobody ever told me that, as I've been on a fairy tale rant for the last 40 years. And I went and I checked into it. And there is actually, Where the Wild Things is also not acceptable, because it involves, the criterion Eckers says something to the effect of, you should not have literature in your classroom that where problems are solved through any means except for peaceful negotiation and discussion.
Oh, wow.
And this includes, I mean, it specifically says in there, and this includes many folk and fairy tales. And then I was like, this can't be right. This must be an old
And
Eckers.
not be right. Thelma Harms, get
But
on
yeah,
that.
Where the Wild Things are, because there's a threat to eat him up.
Oh, boy.
That's also considered on the hit list. I am horrified. I mean, it flies in the face of all that we know about resilience and of what children need in order to handle adversity and all of that. And I actually got the name of somebody that I could contact it. A teacher.
Thelma Harms, Richard Clifford, or Debbie Cryer.
They need to hear my perspective before the next one comes out, which I haven't done yet. But I think so. That is, I talked to somebody who was an Eckers person who had hired me to come and do a workshop on fairy tales for her staff, and she said, well, like, you can just, you don't have to. No center's going to get dinged completely. They're, like, for if they don't meet that one criteria, it's okay. But thinking about how people perseverate about every single little detail when you're being evaluated by whether it's NACE or Eckers, I mean, I can understand how people would say, well, right here it says no fairy tales, so I'm not going to take the time. I can't do it.
Which is a good point to bring up. In the last Porch Play Chat, we were talking about, in some of these quality rating instruments, they would want you to wash hands 6 hours a day, right? I mean, all the time. Here's when you should wash hands, right? We should wash hands before we eat. We should wash hands after we toilet. We should wash hands, if we blow our nose or sneeze into our hand. And I don't know, I think that's it. And so that prevents illness, right? And so sometimes you have to pick and choose which criteria you're going to get a 7 on.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interest of development and what we know is good for children, you choose not to. When I was a teacher and I had Eckers, people come in back in the day, and I got a 2 in hand washing, and I didn't care. It was one criteria. I got a 2 in hand washing. I got 5s and 6s and 7s in other categories. I didn't care, because I wasn't going to have my children disrupt their play by doing all these things. Yeah. So, sometimes, and even Thelma says, listen, you're not going to get 7s everywhere, and nor should you. Mm-hmm. We're just telling you what best practice is, and you can pick and choose what you choose. And so, sometimes I think we just get so hyper focused on assessment for the wrong reasons. And, I just keep thinking forest kindergartens do not have running water.
Right.
Children are fine. Right?
Yeah.
Let's just think about that for a minute. And let's just try to calm ourselves down and say, what is my intention? And is my intention to promote healthy child development, resilience, exploration, curiosity, risk-taking when they're young, so that they get that internal sort of thing that they need to keep themselves safe as they get older? or is it to follow something in a book that doesn't know my children? So I mean, I really want to challenge people, because I think sometimes we are focusing on the wrong thing. So think about everything Stephanie just talked to us about, and bring in some fairy tales. You know, oh my goodness, you could turn your whole classroom into a fairy tale, and it would be amazing. Those of you who haven't ever looked into the storybook journey, that's what they do. They take a book and they turn the entire classroom into that book for an extended period of time, so children deeply explore it. So I want you to think about what your intentions are, and then what you're doing to support those intentions. All of us want children to be successful. All of us want children to be able to be successful in every phase of their life. So think about what you're doing to contribute or inhibit that. And that's always a good place of reflection to start. Oh, Stephanie, this was amazing.
Oh, thanks, Deb.
We need to have you back to talk more about this, because I think the more we can relax people's fears about incorporating fairy tales, the more we'll be able to help them feel more comfortable bringing them into the classroom. So I'm going to invite you again, and I hope you'll come back and join us. So stay right there while we close up. So to learn more about IPA-USA, please visit our website at IPAUSA.org. And until next time, keep on playing.